Lives have been destroyed. People are dead.
The truth was far more fucked up than anyone would have thought.
This whole story also attacks the very premise of Peter Mandelson.
Given how many times he's been in and out of the Labour Party, you would understand why people would say it cannot be redeemed. It can no longer be the progressive party that we want it to be.
Is it a weird thing to walk around with that tag of the person who predicted the 2008 crash?
I mean, that was a book that didn't sell.
Is it 2005 again? Am I about to be 20 again now? Will my hair go black again?
Yes, it is. And what's really difficult about a bubble is predicting when it bursts.
I'm Nish Kumar.
And I'm Coco Khan. Welcome to PodSave the UK.
Now, Coco, eagle-eyed viewers and maybe very, very eagle-eared listeners might have noticed that you and I are not in the same room currently.
Do eagles have really good hearing?
I actually don't know. What's something that has good hearing? Mothers, when you're saying rude things about them in the next room. That's the one.
Okay.
That's what has good hearing. The eagle-eared mothers.
Yes. The eagle-eared mothers will know that I'm not in the studio this week. Yeah. I am beaming in from I wanted to say somewhere really tropical and amazing, but I'm just in my in-laws' house. So if you hear a landline, they still exist here. So enjoy this blast from the past. Well, I'm sad not to be there with you, not least just so we can console each other over what is genuinely some of the most horrifying news I've seen. And we do this podcast every week.
It's been one of the worst news weeks, I think you're right, of the entire lifespan of this show. Look, it's hard to overstate the importance of the newest revelations from the Epstein files. We've got a Secretary of State leaking confidential, market-sensitive government information to a convicted sex offender who apparently used it for financial gain and influence.
And quite often, understandably, when you hear these tales, you focus on the offenders. You know, it's monstrous acts and you wonder why. But I really think we need to put at the heart of this story is the victims of Epstein and the people around him who took advantage of his money and his influence. Those women are still fighting for justice, and these new documents will hopefully get them closer to that.
There's now a police investigation. There's growing pressure on key figures to give evidence in the US and more questions about our Prime Minister's judgment. Keir Starmer told the cabinet that he was gobsmacked by the appalling revelations, and here's what he said today about what we've heard so far.
Mandelson betrayed our country, our parliament, and my party. Mr. Speaker, he lied repeatedly to my team when asked about his relationship with Epstein before and during his tenure as ambassador. I regret appointing him. If I knew then what I know now, he would never have been anywhere near government.
Now, Lord Mandelson used to be seen as some kind of political genius, so much so his nickname was the Prince of Darkness. He was instrumental in the rise of New Labour in the 90s and stayed close to the heart of the party, mentoring and advising younger politicians as they rose through the ranks to positions of power.
Even when he first appeared in the notorious Epstein files, he was able to explain and excuse his links to a convicted sex offender. Here he is speaking to the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg after he was first sacked as US ambassador.
While it's had the most calamitous consequences for me, the crux of this is not me. The crux of this is not the friendship I had 25 years ago with Jeffrey Epstein. The crux of this is that so many hundreds of young women were completely trapped, powerless in a system that did not listen to what they had to say.
Not everyone was convinced, but now following the release of more emails from the files, the picture looks even more damning than they could have assumed. He's previously denied any wrongdoing.
There are a lot of claims and more are emerging all the time as people review the new documents. There are more than 3 million to get through. The new allegations come from a load of emails between the two men. Mandelson gave Epstein advance notice of a €500 billion bailout from the EU during the global financial crisis. He sent internal government information about the state of the UK economy in 2009. Also in 2009, he lobbied the Treasury on banking policy at Epstein's suggestion. And he even told Epstein that JP Morgan should mildly threaten the UK Treasury over bankers' bonuses. At the time, it was reported that the bank had threatened to pull plans for the bank's new UK headquarters. So what happens now? The Met Police has launched an investigation into allegations of misconduct in public office. Peter Mandelson has resigned from the Lords, and the Labour Party and Keir Starmer has started the process of drafting legislation that will strip him of his title.
But it doesn't stop there. The European Commission said on Tuesday that it would investigate Mandelson's time as the European Trade Commissioner between 2004 and 2008. He's also resigned from the Labour Party in a letter on Sunday. In it, he specifically refers to an allegation that Epstein made financial payments of around $75,000 to him between 2003 and 2004. He claims those allegations are false and that he had no recollection or record of them, though he has remembered a £10,000 payment from Epstein to his partner in 2009 to pay the cost of an osteopathy course, which Mandelson described as a lapse of judgment. This whole story also attacks the very premise of Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson's a figure that has sort of, haunted politics most of our adult lives, Coco. But the premise of Peter Mandelson and this idea that he was the Prince of Darkness, which is a sort of nickname he acquired in the 90s under New Labour, is that he was a person well-versed in the quote-unquote dark arts of politics. And the reason that people were comfortable with his deployment of said dark arts is because he was trying to advance a progressive political cause and trying to get a Labour government elected. Now, this story completely dismantles the very idea, the purpose of Peter Mandelson. He was not trying to advance a progressive political cause. It's all very well and good for Mandelson to claim that he's now thinking about the victims and centering them. He doesn't seem to have been particularly concerned about the victims or centering them based on an email exchange that the Daily Mail has reported on from these Epstein files. The email exchange is after Epstein was released from prison, with this exchange about Epstein celebrating with two strippers. Mandelson asks him how is freedom feeling, and Epstein says she feels fresh, firm, and creamy. I actually stumbled over that because it's quite hard physically to read that out loud. And Mandelson responds, naughty boy. Now remember, this was after Jeffrey Epstein had been released from prison on sex crimes. I can't believe I'm having to say that, but that is the situation that we find ourselves in. And secondly, it's not particularly progressive to, on instructions from said paedophile, be lobbying the Labour government in 2009, as Mandelson appears to have done based on these email exchanges, on behalf of JP Morgan to attempt to water down legislation the Labour government's trying to pass and protect bankers' bonuses. It is a serious question for Keir Starmer about his political judgment. It is a really serious question because lives have been destroyed. People are dead. Women were sexually assaulted and sexually exploited. If we're really taking violence against women and girls seriously, which we supposedly are as a society, we have to question how seriously we can be taking it if, given what we already knew about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, the Prime Minister of this country was willing to give him a job as an ambassador to the United States. Listen, before we move on, let me just say, and I just want to say I'm saying this entirely of my own volition. I just feel like I have to bring this up. Peter Mandelson denies all wrongdoing. So I'm just bringing that up of my own accord and in no way am doing that because we are legally obliged to. That's just something I wanted to throw into the mix.
Just wanted to throw in there.
Sometimes it's nice to bring in a denial of wrongdoing, when you're alleged to have lobbied on behalf of the banking industry on the instructions of a paedophile. Sometimes it's nice to throw in the denial that you've issued so far. Anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on. Next up, so we have Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and a new police investigation after a woman told the BBC that she was trafficked to the UK for sex in 2010. Added to the latest truly grim photos from the Epstein files show the former prince kneeling over a fully dressed woman who is lying on the floor. I'm sure we've all seen the pictures. They are absolutely chilling.
Calls have grown for him to give evidence to the United States Congress over his links to the convicted sex offender. Keir Starmer has backed those calls, saying that Epstein's victims have to be the first priority.
Emails from Andrew's ex-wife Sarah Ferguson to Epstein were also released, in which she calls him the baby brother she always wanted. And in another, she thanks him for his generosity and kindness. All of these emails were sent after his conviction for child sex offences, but they do not imply any wrongdoing. But the I think probably they're going to say that they didn't know about the conviction, but everybody knew about the convictions, particularly in that circle, that kind of high-profile circle. There's an anecdote that's being reported in the FT, actually, that the journalist Tina Brown was invited to an Epstein dinner in 2010. She's reported to have said, "What the fuck is this? The paedophile ball," which just gives you an insight into how many people, within the media certainly knew that this conviction had happened. So the idea that his close friends didn't, it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Absolutely astonishing. Just to clear up, because obviously we've talked a lot about Jeffrey Epstein's convictions and what people knew and what people didn't know. In 2008, Epstein pled guilty to charges of procuring a child for prostitution and soliciting a prostitute. Now, this was done as a plea deal, even though federal officials had identified a total of 36 abuse victims, some as young as 14. He served almost 13 months in custody. So that's 2008. He was then arrested again in Florida in July 2019 on federal charges for sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York. And a month later was found dead in his cell. So when people say they didn't know, they certainly knew in 2008 that he had pled guilty to charges for procuring a child for prostitution. So again, the sort of obfuscations and explanations are pretty nauseating. And it's hard to even start to imagine how Epstein's victims are feeling this week.
Very briefly, when we were on a break from this record, I went on to the DOJ's website. I don't know why I did this. And I just typed in Me Too just to see. Was Epstein talking about the Me Too movement to anyone? And yeah, he was. I mean, there were so many emails. I only had like a first pass on like the first couple of pages. But it was like nauseating to see him talk to Woody Allen's wife about how Me Too movement had gone too far. And I just felt like screaming at the computer, the Me Too movement did not go far enough, my friend. I really seriously hope we see some actual consequences for this. So anyway, Keir Starmer, his trip to China, that feels like a really long time ago, doesn't it? He was in Japan as well. That was seen as a pretty successful visit. He was barely back before the news broke, and he found his decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as the UK ambassador to the US under the spotlight once again. Labour they just love bringing this guy back. This is his fourth resignation, if resignations also include being forced to quit.
It's also a massive headache for Starmer's chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney. Mandelson was his mentor, and reportedly McSweeney promoted his move to US ambassador. As we're recording at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the news has broken that Starmer is going to attempt to try and get ahead of this latest turning of the wheel in this scandal. So he is going to release files relating to Mandelson's appointment as Britain's ambassador to the US. And government ministers apparently described this as drawing a line in the sand. The Conservative Party was preparing to force the publication of the records, including what Mandelson may have told Starmer about his relationship with Epstein. But instead of facing that vote, Starmer has ordered the publication of the records. So that's going to be emails, documents, and messages. There will be some that are redacted that are deemed prejudicial to national security or that could damage diplomatic relations. So I imagine, as with a lot of the revelations relating to Epstein, when those are released, there will be some controversy and scrutiny over what has been redacted here. I mean, we're talking about kind of international crisis of trusts in government and, this kind of rise of conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking. You try and fight really hard to defend principles of trust and accountability and to say to people you can't allow that to be eroded, and we talk a lot about social media algorithms eroding trust, and that is true and really important. But I mean, sometimes it's really fucking hard to tell people that they should have confidence in government and not believe in conspiracy theories when this kind of information is revealed.
You and I don't like this word, but in many respects, we could say we are reformers in the sense that we want to see things get better. We want to see standards actually upheld. But I understand how people are like, just rip it all up. And it cannot be fixed. The foundations are rotten. Someone like Peter Mandelson, given how many times he's been in and out of the Labour Party, you would understand why people would say his fingerprints are simply too much over how the Labour Party thinks, how they operate. It cannot be redeemed. It can no longer be the progressive party that we want it to be anymore. And the conspiracy theory stuff, Pizzagate, it was mocked, wasn't it? People made fun of it. Yeah. And actually, a paedophile ring of elites the truth was was far more fucked up than anyone could have thought.
I remember people making jokes at the time saying, has he been appointed as US ambassador because him and Trump both spent time on Pedo Island? Like, I literally remember people saying that stuff at the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we weren't all aware of this. You know, even if Starmer knew what we all knew, that should have been enough to say that he wasn't, you know, and there were also people applauding him for, you know, wow, this is a really canny piece of political maneuvering, you know, for Starmer to have done this with Mandelson. Are you fucking kidding me?
I just also want to mention, just while we're here talking about the Labour Party, it's not been a great week for them. Aside from this, Dan Norris, a former Labour minister and now an independent MP, has been arrested for a second time on suspicion of rape, sexual assault, voyeurism and upskirting. Meanwhile, Tulip Siddiq has been sentenced to 4 years in jail in Bangladesh for corruption charges. My God.
Not a good week for the Labour Party.
You know, I mentioned I went onto the DOJ
Yeah.
to just have the experience of typing this in just to be horrified and mortified in this historic way. I also searched for Nigel Farage, and his name comes up, but what I saw was just articles written about him being circulated. But it did actually make me think, he's been quite quiet on this, hasn't he? He's not said much about it. I thought he really cared about the women and girls.
Yeah, I mean, I think it presents a problem for Nigel Farage because of his consistent, close personal relationship with, you know, Donald Trump. Also,
Donald Trump,
his personal relationship with Steve Bannon, who's sort of featured pretty repeatedly in the Epstein files. I mean, I imagine I speak for a lot of people this week who once again have found themselves going, what the fuck, Noam Chomsky? Are you, what in the name of God? Anyway, it's just not hugely relevant to what we were talking about, but I feel that I'm going to hazard a guess that I'm articulating a lot of what people who are listening to this currently would say this week. Just an important reminder, obviously, being in the files, we have to be clear, doesn't imply wrongdoing. So look, after the break, I'm going to chat to the economist who called the 2008 crash, Ann Pettifor, about the Mandelson allegations, where we place our bets on when the AI bubble will burst, and her new book about what she calls the global casino. Pod Save the UK is brought to you by Shopify.
Starting something new isn't just hard, it's terrifying. There is so much work going into this thing that you're not entirely sure will work out, and it can be hard to make that leap of faith. But despite all the fears and hesitations, the right time to start believing in yourself is always right now, especially when you have a partner like Shopify on your side.
Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started.
Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style.
What if people haven't heard about my brand? Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns.
And what if I get stuck? Well, Shopify is always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support.
And did we mention that iconic purple Shop Pay button that's used by millions of businesses around the world? It's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. It also helps boost conversions, meaning less carts going abandoned and more sales for you.
It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today.
Sign up for your £1 per month trial at shopify.co.uk/podsavethuk.
Go to shopify.co.uk/podsavethuk.
That's shopify.co.uk/podsavethuk. So, the Epstein files have given us a flavour of the way in which elite financial interests, the distortion of state functions and gender imbalance converge to undermine the rule of law. Now, Ann Pettifor, the economist who predicted the 2008 crash and was one of the architects of the Green New Deal, has written a new book which explains how this very same global elite have also rigged the financial system. Ann, welcome to Pod Save the UK.
Thanks, Nish. Great to be here.
It's a hell of a thing. Is it a weird thing to walk around with that tag of the person who predicted the 2008 crash?
Yeah, it is a bit, really, because actually quite a few others predicted it as well. But I must say, I'm one of the few women that did. You know, I'd written a book called The Coming First World Debt Crisis.
Yeah.
And I tell you, it felt like a lead balloon. I mean, that was a book that didn't sell. And everybody just said, oh, she's that old lefty, don't take any notice of her. But then amazingly, after the crisis broke, people began to say, oh, that little woman, so it's been quite nice.
Okay, well, referring to a book that didn't sell is an incredible way to open a conversation that starts with your new book.
Yeah.
Your new book is called The Global Casino.
Yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. Before we talk about the issues it raises, just spell out to us the concept of the global casino.
So I wanted to make people aware of something economists call the international financial and monetary system. And I want ordinary people, when I say ordinary people, I mean me and you, to understand that this is like a sort of construction. This is a construction, it's a kind of architecture. And I envisage it as a casino because actually there's so much gambling that goes on in there. But what I want to show people is that this is like a giant casino, and inside the casino are little booths. And these are countries, this is Britain, this is France, that's the United States, China, that's South Africa, this is Sierra Leone. And they're inside this giant casino. And people inside the booths scarcely aware of the fact they're inside a casino.
Yeah.
The key thing about the booths is that they've got their doors wide open and they never close their doors, with the exception of China.
Yeah.
And so people in the casino, which are mainly gamblers, speculators are what they're called in the financial system, but also gangsters, the mafia, terrorists, drug dealers, they're all, swanning around inside the casino. And they can dip into the doors, through the doors, into our economies and out again without any friction. But in reality, it means all these speculators plus all the criminals associated with the casino are sort of doing us huge harm, and we don't know it exists. And partly that's because it sounds like something remote.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make it into a territory, and I wanted that territory to take shape, and the shape is a casino. And the key thing, and here we get back to dear old David Graeber, is that we constructed that casino.
Yeah.
And we can just as easily deconstruct it and reconstruct another system.
There's the derivatives market. There's people investing in speculation, essentially. But a lot of one of the most alarming things about the book is how it explains how your pension is part of that investment. They're not gambling with their money a lot of the time. They're gambling with your money. And how was that? Say, just specifically taking the example of the UK.
Yeah.
How did we get to the point that has been allowed? What measures of deregulation have brought us here?
So it starts with the privatization of pensions in Chile back in the 1970s. And Mrs. Thatcher gets wind of this and thinks, oh, why don't we do that too here? And BlackRock comes along and scoops up our pensions and says, leave it to me. I'm going to invest your pension in, I don't know, the US dollar, which never falls in value. Or in whatever gold or silver or whatever I think would make you more money. And we say, fine, here it is. So we're extremely vulnerable. So the point of the book is to say, this system impacts on you, dear reader, on a daily basis. Your pension, the price of your food, because, all these agricultural goods that are traded, and energy. These are key things, not to mention house prices. That open door means capital can flow into your country and inflate the value of your properties and render you homeless. And because we're ignorant of that, we blame our neighbours, we blame supply and demand, but we don't blame the system.
This is a very interesting week for you and me to be having this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because journalists around the world have been digging into the Epstein files, and we're getting some sense through this story of the architecture of this kind of shadow banking system that the book points out.
Yeah.
In the book, you write about how the globalized financial system operates beyond the reach of regulatory democracy and the law. So one big revelation this week has been Peter Mandelson leaking sensitive information to Epstein, and the police are reviewing claims that when he was business secretary, he gave advance notice to Jeffrey Epstein of a bailout from the European Union. Now, and can I just take a guess that you have not necessarily been as surprised say as some of us have been by some of the revelations. Not just this EU bailout, but also the fact that Mandelson, seemingly at the instruction of Epstein, was lobbying about bankers' bonuses in 2009.
What's really bugging me at the moment, Nish, is that none of the big media outlets are focusing, except for the Financial Times.
Yes.
And Jim Pickard must get real credit for this. Nobody's focusing on the fact that this is a Wall Street story. This is a banker's story. And they wanted to attack the post-crisis regulation. Now, we were watching all this from here.
Yeah.
And there was something called Dodd-Frank, where finally the government said, after the great financial crisis, in which millions of people lost their homes, their jobs, they suffered divorce, they committed suicide. After all of that chaos, we're now going to manage the system.
Yeah.
We're going to regulate it. And then as we watched them talking through Congress, talking through Dodd-Frank, we noticed that it was being diluted. And we wondered, I blamed all the Americans. I kept going on about those Americans, blah. Turns out it was a Brit.
Who says we're a waning global power, Anne?
Exactly. I mean, so then, there am I being so unkind about those Americans. And it turns out it was the Brits.
You write about how in 2021 the world lost $144.8 billion in tax revenues to tax abuse related to offshore financial wealth. Now, there are allegations that Epstein was part of a system that created offshore structures for powerful people. What are the implications for the structures of democracy and the rule of law when capital essentially supersedes the will of democratically elected governments?
You've just told the whole story of the book. That's what the book's about, really.
Spoiler alert warning.
But the point is this. You're in this little booth called Britain inside the casino, and you're worried about how you're going to tax these guys going in and out of your economy.
Yeah.
The idea that you're going to say, we're going to tax you, and they're going to sit there and be taxed is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're taking their profits and their capital gains into tax havens the minute you mention it.
What does a kind of legislative response look like to actually close those doors down? Is it international cooperation?
It's called macro-prudential rules, basically. And if I could give you an example of one, I noticed the other day that Elon Musk threatened he was going to buy something in Europe. Oh, Ryanair. That's right.
Yeah. He got in a. I don't even know how he's managed this, but he somehow managed to get in a pissing contest with Michael O'Leary, the owner of Ryanair.
No, exactly. And what happens? The European Commission says, sorry, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
That's a capital control.
Yeah.
That's saying we're closing the door to you, Elon Musk, when it comes to our airlines. These are things that the central bank can do, that government can do, that the European Commission or the British government can do to sort of manage. I'm not against money flowing in and out because we all want to go on holiday to Costa Rica, for God's sake. But what we need to do is manage those flows. And I always say, can you imagine the boss of Apple saying, I'm not going to manage flows in and out of my business. I'm going to leave it blah. Nobody would do that. And we do that. Our governments do that as a matter of policy. And the deregulation, the key thing happened in 1971 when effectively the JP Morgans of this world persuaded governments to lift any management of capital flows or, of the regulatory book. And we did. We obliged the financial system. They can't believe their luck. Nor can drug dealers. If you're running county lines and you're looting young men, vulnerable young men of all their money, and you want to transfer it back to Colombia, nobody's going to stop you. And we sit around and don't worry about that. I get very het up about these things.
That's fine. Getting het up is the sort of raison d'etre for this podcast, Anne. It's absolutely fine. It's a show presented by people who get het up and listened to by people who are getting het up. So it's absolutely fine for you to be het up. I want to come back. Well, I don't want to come back to Elon Musk. I never want to speak about the man again. But I'm obliged to come back to Elon Musk. But before we do, the 1971 incident that you're referring to is really important to the core of the book.
Yeah.
It's when the Nixon government essentially moves the economic system away from and essentially abandons the principles of Bretton Woods, right?
Yeah.
Can you just briefly explain that? Whenever I read stuff about this subject, we've always identified, things like the Pinochet Chile government. We've always identified Thatcher and Reaganism and talked about post-1979 economics. This was not something I was aware of, and I was not aware of the significance of what the Nixon government did. Could you just briefly outline that?
Yeah, so we love to talk about the politics of this stuff, and I'm saying talk about the economics of it because the economics is highly political.
Yeah.
So after the war, Keynes and a bunch of economists at Bretton Woods had sat down. It was really interesting. Roosevelt refused to allow any Wall Street bank to attend the Bretton Woods conference. It was only economists from the North and the South, actually. And
which, again, is such an important precedent.
45, they looked back at the 1930s when they had these vast bubbles, when they had the 1929 crash, which was followed by a catastrophic world war, never mind unemployment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they thought, that was crazy. We must never do that again. So they sit around a table and they say, we've got to manage capital flows. We've got to manage this trade. We've got to do that as well. And we've got to manage the currencies that we use in trading. And they win most of the arguments on capital mobility. The Americans and the rest of the world agree we've got to manage capital cross-border flows. And they also agree that we must manage trade. Where they don't agree is that the dollar should be the world's reserve currency. That's just what the Americans want. Okay. Anyway, so between 45 and 71 is a period known to all economists on the left and the right as the golden age of economics. The golden age. Employment was high. Even the poor countries in Africa were expanding their economic activity and doing well. What happened then was America decides to go to war in Vietnam, and they get into debt. They get into debt. And getting into debt in your own country, where you've got a bank that issues the currency and manages the amount of credit in the economy, is one thing. But getting into debt with foreigners is another. You've got to repay your debts in a currency called the dollar. But the Americans are getting out of balance, right? And any low-income country will tell you they know what this means, because this is what happens when the IMF zooms into a country and tells them to structurally adjust their economy. The Americans would refuse to structurally adjust their economy. They should have, if you like, stopped buying from abroad and invested more at home. But they chose not to do that. They kept wanting to buy from abroad. Yeah. And so the answer to that was to say, to hell with this standard for balancing the books. We're not going to pay anymore. We're not going to pay the dollars relative to gold. Nixon decided to do this without consulting the rest of the world. He goes on the television and said, we're not going to repay our debts in the way that we promised we would do before. And if you don't like that, go and jump in the lake. And so they simply default on their obligations to repay their debts in the way that was agreed. And that's the sovereign default. Economists won't call it that. I don't know why, but they don't call it a sovereign default. But it's what, poor countries like in Africa do. Yeah. That's what the Americans did. But instead of the IMF flying in and saying, structurally adjust your economy, restore balance, they said, it's the Americans. The only one who really disagreed with this was President de Gaulle. They sent a battleship to New York to retrieve their gold from Fort Knox. And they said, we don't want your greenbacks. Yeah. Because what Nixon said was, we haven't got money to repay you in that way. But what you can do is you can borrow one of our government bonds. And if you hold that, we'll pay it over 30 years. And, so there's you'll get that in return for it. Yeah. And as I say in the book, it's like going to your tailor and saying, please make me a suit, and paying your tailor, and then your tailor paying you back again. And you're thinking, well, God, if I've got that money again, I'll have another suit. Yeah. And that's how the Americans treat it, we lent them money. So they kept buying and consuming, and eventually huge imbalances built up.
Right. Let's look at Elon Musk and use him as a sort of way into discussing one of the biggest financial risks taken by Wall Street in the last few years, which is the gamble on artificial intelligence. It's technology that doesn't exist yet in real terms. No. Now, I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem smart. It doesn't seem particularly wise, and it feels like a huge bubble that's about to burst. So with Elon Musk, SpaceX announced a $1.25 trillion deal this week to acquire xAI, which is a company also founded by Musk, which was announced last month to be the recipient of a $2 billion investment from Tesla, which is another company owned by Elon Musk. According to a Reuters source, xAI was valued at $250 billion. We're talking about technology that doesn't exist, and we're talking about companies being bought by other companies owned by the person that owns all the companies. Please help me make sense of what's happening here.
So you got to start with Twitter and X, right?
Okay.
So he pays crazy money.
Like way over the odds. Like
way over the odds, just to have the power of that platform,
Yeah.
right? Like, and it's given him huge power, let's face it. So what is he doing? He's merging his companies to invest money effectively in Twitter, ultimately, to put some of their surplus into the deficit that Twitter's built up. And he's, to be fair, he's got a surplus in X space or whatever it's called. But that's all that he's doing. This is where the crunch will really come from. Because what's happening with AI is that all these big platforms have loads of cash because we're just handing it over.
Yeah.
We hand over our data and they monetize that like crazy. And we are so happy for them to do that.
Yeah.
They can't believe how much money they're reeling in. But what's happened now that even though they have all that cash, they've actually run out of cash because they've invested so much in this non-existent asset called AI. They're now having to borrow, and they're shifting that off the balance sheet, really. And the huge big five corporates involved in AI, they're competing with each other to deliver all this stuff. But they can only get better and compete with each other if they build more data centers. That means they need cash to buy land and invest in data centers, which burns up huge quantities of energy, right, and put up our electricity prices probably in the end. And this is why Musk is talking about going to the moon and sticking his data center on the moon. It's complete bonkers madness, really. And it's all, if I may say so, thanks to the casino.
What you're saying is we shouldn't look at the AI bubble as something distinct or in any way separate.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't look at tech companies as being distinct or separate.
They
from
wouldn't
what's
have
going on.
that cash if they couldn't be siphoning it off every country in the world. And we've given them the whole world to play with.
If the entire stock exchange in the States is kind of based around AI companies and companies like NVIDIA that make the hardware, but all these companies are doing is essentially leveraging debts off different bits of themselves, then surely that is a bubble that's going to burst. Is it 2005 again? Am I about to be 20 again now? Will my hair go black again?
Do you know? Yes, it is.
Right.
And what's really difficult about a bubble is predicting when it bursts, really.
Right.
I predicted it would burst, but I didn't get the date right. So timing is of the essence here, and nobody knows. And nobody knows what will be the trigger as well, because it'll be some weird thing that'll blow up from nowhere that you would not expect it to be, But that it's a bubble, is commonplace now.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody is saying it. There's nothing clever about saying it. And, what's also terrifying is, and this is where we have to understand our public institutions, because what I want to make clear in the book is that these guys operate in this stratosphere, but at the same time, they're tethered to the Federal Reserve, basically. And Jerome Powell has said, and I quote him in the book, don't worry, we've got all that it takes to bail them out, If you have a central bank that exists to bail out these big bad guys, these very wealthy elites, the people will get angry. The people are pissed off about it, and they're right. And, we think the people don't understand macroeconomics. We're completely wrong.
Yeah.
They get it. They can see what's going on. You and I can see what's going on, right? And they are mad as hell. And in my book, I argue, along with Carl Polanyi, that they're so mad they're looking for strong men to protect them from these bad guys. And that strong man could be Donald Trump. I was shocked. Donald Trump went to Davos and he talked to the bankers and he said, you've got to put a cap on interest rates on credit cards. That is so blindingly, obviously a wrong.
Yeah.
And it takes a fascist to make the point, really. Yeah. But what he's doing there is saying, don't worry, I haven't forgotten my base here. My base elected me because they said they want to, of course, I won't touch Wall Street and I ain't going to mess with Elon Musk. No. But every so often I'm going to throw a bone.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. This thing about Trump occasionally just says something like, you have to cap credit card debt at Davos, but he's not doing anything to really endanger his real paymasters. No. We saw the inauguration. You saw who was sat in that room. After the break, is the Green New Deal, which Anne helped to create, dead in the water?
Pod Save the UK is brought to you by Aura Frames. Aura Frames is the answer to every gifting moment.
Coco and I both have Aura frames. Mm-hmm. We've gifted them to our families. They are amazing, amazing presents. It has free unlimited storage, so you can add as many photos and videos as you want. My parents have recently become grandparents, and they are thrilled only, it seems, by photos of their new grandchild. And so you can put photos and videos on there, as many as you want. Unlimited storage.
I'm actually using mine for me at the moment. I gave one to my mum, and now I've got one.
Oh, great.
It's Now I'm using it, I am reminded of the amazing functionality, which is why my mum likes it so much. Even she, who is not necessarily great with technology, is able to put photos up. Also, as an exercise of going through my camera roll, I really take a lot of photos of things that have gone wrong in my flat. I've just got a lot of pictures on my camera roll of the radiators leaking. Is that a damp patch? But anyway, when you have actual good photos, it really is perfect. They come out looking so nice, almost like print photos.
You can personalize your gift, so you can add a message before it arrives, and there's a gift box included. So every frame comes packaged in a premium gift box with no price tag.
So that's Aura Frames, the perfect gift every time. It's named #1 by Wirecutter. By all sorts of people as well, me included. And you can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com. For a limited time, listeners can get $35 off their best-selling Carver matte frame with code PSTUK. So that's Aura Frames, AURA frames.com, promo code PSTUK.
Support the show by mentioning us at the checkout. Terms and conditions apply. One of the other bubbles that you identify, or potential major bubbles, is the entire insurance industry. And that's because the entire insurance industry is imperiled by the prospect of total climate breakdown.
Yeah.
And the book really, one of the things that I thought was really great was how much it explained how global casino is responsible for the acceleration of climate breakdown and is also imperiled by it. Both of those threats will impact on ordinary people. Yeah. In attempting to kind of avert this crisis, you've been one of the architects of a Green New Deal.
Yeah.
So there was a 2008 report that outlined a series of UK-specific policy proposals to mitigate climate change.
Yeah.
The Labour government was elected with a pledge that it would hardwire a Green New Deal into every level of government.
Yeah.
But the £28 billion Green Plan has been shelved.
Yeah.
Are these ideas dead in the water, Anne? And what would your message be to the Labour government on the implementation of a Green New Deal?
Well, two things. On the insurance industry, I live in a little town called Saxmundham in Suffolk, and on the coast is another village called Thorpeness, and it's literally being washed away by the storms this last few weeks. This is happening across the coast in England. This is because the seas are rising, and this is because temperatures are rising, and the scientists have been telling us that for a very long time. Now, the key thing about that is that people bought their houses at great expense, because this is quite an exclusive little village, really. It's a sort of Islington by the sea place.
I've been down there, Anne. It's a nice place.
Yeah.
It's a lovely bit of the world.
Properties for 1.2 million.
Yeah.
Nothing. Insurance companies aren't going to go to the coastal properties, that people have bought. And we saw that most vividly in Los Angeles. Yeah. And the problem is that when the insurance industry withdraws, the mortgage companies have to withdraw.
Yeah.
Because you can't get a mortgage without insurance, And so this is a kind of disaster coming towards us, which we don't want to think about. And then we say, sorry, there's nothing we can do about this. There's nothing we can do about the climate. Because you know what, Nish? There is no money in the bank.
Yeah.
And this is what drives me utterly wild, that our politicians go around saying there is no money. And we all know that when the great financial crisis came, suddenly there was a lot of money.
Yeah.
When COVID broke, suddenly there was a load of money. Who got it? The rich got that money, basically, mainly because they have the power to move their capital abroad. And the point is that our monetary system, and I tried to make this case in the book, is a great civilizational advance. It's something that we invented to enable us to do what we can do. And we can do something about the climate. And we can make the money system work for us. But right now, the monetary system and the Bank of England work primarily for private capital markets, for the casino, and they don't work for us, right? They work for creditors and not for debtors. They make sure that creditors get very high real rates of interest, and we debtors, and there's far more of us than there are of the creditors, we got to pay those very high usurious rates, as I call them. So, but we need a reorientation of these central banks to take into account the interests of the economy, and in particular of the people of Britain. And that kind of shouldn't be hard to do. And the thing that bugs me is that the politicians sit there saying there is no money, and it's terribly sad. And they pretend to be powerless, right? They own the Bank of England, for God's sake. We nationalised the Bank of England in 1945. It's your bank. You tell your bank to do what you want doing. Now, there are limits, and of course you can't be irresponsible. But the fact of the matter is, it's your bank. It's not somebody else's bank.
Yeah.
It's not Elon Musk's bank. It's your bank. And it should be working for your people.
It was so much of what you said in terms of the solutions that exist from a kind of climate catastrophe perspective.
Yeah.
And also this idea that, Donald Trump has been making hay by essentially talking the language of anti-elite politics, whilst obviously doing the opposite in policy terms. But there's a huge opportunity for progressive political parties here, isn't there? There's a huge opportunity. And it's not being taken, though, is it? But it is there, right? What needs to be done actually exists within what we would recognise to be a leftist or progressive political philosophy, right?
What it takes is political courage, and it takes leadership. For me, the model is Roosevelt in 1933. In 1933, we'd had the global financial crisis, we had capital mobility, we had chaos, we had imbalances, we had the threat of war, we had the rise of Nazis, right? And he stood up and he said, I am going to break down the gold standard system. And the gold standard system was globalization, pre-1945. He said, no, I'm not going to have that anymore. And the economists all said, oh, you can't possibly, blah. Let's have a conference and restore the gold standard. And he said, you can have a conference, I'm not going to attend. And he then turned Wall Street. It's funny, his finance minister was called Morgenthau. He said, we moved the government from Wall Street to my office in Washington, right? We need a politician who has the courage to say, I'm going to move the government from the City of London to my office down in Whitehall. If we had that kind of political courage, we could then tackle all of these great crises that we face.
We've done it before and we can do it again, right?
We can do it again, sure. Sure as God made little chickens. I don't know why I said that.
I'm going to start pitching a children's TV show for you to teach children about economics and then at the end say, call them all my little chickens.
Oh, dear.
And thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK. Anne's book, The Global Casino, How Wall Street Gambles with People and the Planet, is available via Verso Books. It's out now and it is absolutely fantastic. Now, before we go, we need to mark a hugely significant cultural moment. And it's a moment so hugely significant, I just had to ask the producers how it was pronounced. Forget Barbenheimer, it's time for Melania. The Melania Trump documentary dropped in the US on the same day as the music mockumentary The Moment has been released. The Moment is a mockumentary about Charlie XCX. I guess making it the first and probably only time that Melania Trump and Charlie XCX will be featured in the same sentence.
So the interest in seeing Barbie and Oppenheimer on the same day boosted both at the box office, but this crossover might be a bit less successful. So here is a taster.
Everyone wants to know. So here it is. Hi, Mr. President. Congratulations.
Did you watch it?
I did not. Yeah, I will see it on the news.
I mean, it's made me feel physically sick. It's not done as badly as we would imagine. So Melania has taken $7 million in the US on its opening weekend. Apparently, it's the biggest opening for a documentary in 10 years, as long as you leave out concert films. So, it's not a great situation when you're making a kind of claim for success that has to be immediately caveated. It's taken just shy of £33,000 in the UK.
Just £33,000 it's taken in the UK.
I'm
That's
annoyed that it's taken £33,000. From what I can tell, that £33,000 is exclusively from journalists going to see it and writing articles with the headline, "I watched the Melania documentary, so you didn't have to." You didn't have to. Nobody had to watch this shit. It's also really important to note that Amazon coughed up $40 million and a further $35 million to promote it, which makes it the highest price ever paid for a documentary film. Why is this happening, you might ask? Why is Jeff Bezos spending extravagant sums of money that there's absolutely no way of recouping to make a documentary about the wife of Donald Trump? We can only speculate as to why Jeff Bezos may be going out of his way to ingratiate himself further with Donald Trump. You might ask the question, why is this film happening at all? And for answers to that, we might look to Brett Ratner, who is the director and who this week has emerged to be in a photo with Jeffrey Epstein as part of the Epstein file revelations. Ratner is a director who had previously been accused of sexual misconduct, who also directed the Rush Hour films.
Thank you for telling me how now Rush Hour is ruined for me.
Yeah.
There is nothing, literally nothing that we can enjoy, from internet humour to silly action movies, that these fuckers won't try and ruin.
Before we go, Coco, listen, you know me. I'm Mr. Rise and Grind. I wake up every morning and I immediately grind. I'm the absolute high priest of hustle culture. Therefore, I'm sure it'll be a huge surprise to you, as it was to me, and indeed my agents and promoters, that last week I completely forgot to say on the podcast that I have announced a new UK and Ireland tour that's happening in September, October and November of this year. The tickets are available right now. If the idea of watching me do stand-up on stage appeals to you, then buy tickets at nishkumar.co.uk.
I think you missed a crucial bit of information, which is the name of the tour. What is the name of the tour?
The name of the tour is Angry Humour from a Really Nice Guy.
Okay, great. I feel like that should have got a mention.
Rise and Grind. Diary of a CEO.
And that's all for Pod Save the UK this week. Thanks to Ann Pettifor for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.